Hey everyone, and welcome back to Heebie-Jeebies TV. Now, if you're new here, my name is Ashley, and on this channel, we like to talk about stuff like unsolved mysteries, true crime, and the paranormal. Now, before we get into today's video, just want to send you guys a quick reminder to please comment, like, subscribe. I'm trying to manifest over here 1,000 subscribers. Hopefully, at some point this fall, I'm trying to go for October. The end of October, so let's say Halloween, trying to manifest 1,000 subscribers. So if you guys enjoy this video, or even just enjoy hearing about true crime in general, just please comment, like, subscribe. It really does help me grow here on YouTube. Alright, so today we're going to switch things up a little. The last two videos have been about true crime, so I figured it was about time to go back towards the paranormal. Now, I actually came across this story while I was searching for some new topics on Reddit, and it's actually about the real-life inspiration behind the Chucky movies. Now, this was definitely an old-school movie. If you guys were around in the 80s and the early 90s, you might remember Chucky. I think they even made like a more modern version of it in the early 2000s. There was Chucky, Chucky's Bride. I think it also went by Child's Play. But anyways, basically it's about this kid's doll that comes to life and is actually a serial killer and goes around committing all of these heinous crimes, including a bunch of murders. Now, at first, I remember seeing this movie when I was very young. It was very violent and terrifying for me at that age. And my sister was also pretty young too. And her watching this movie actually traumatized her to the point where she couldn't have puppets or any sort of doll that looked like a puppet in her room. But at the time, I also didn't know that Chucky was based on a true story. There actually is a doll that is said to be possessed and actually causes a lot of detriment in people's lives. Now, in the movies, Chucky looks a lot scarier. I'll put a picture here for you guys to see. He definitely looks like a little psychopath of a doll. But the real life doll is called Robert. He goes by Robert the doll, and he actually looks a lot more innocent than he is. So let's start this story, and it actually takes us back all the way to 1904. That year, there was a manufacturing company called Steiff Company in Germany. And this company actually manufactured quite a lot of toys, including Robert the doll. And that same year, Robert was actually bought by an elderly man who was planning on giving it as a gift to his grandson. That particular child was actually Robert Eugene Otto. And his grandfather had actually picked out this doll specifically for him because it reminded him of Eugene, because Eugene had a similar sailor suit. And I'll put a picture here. You can see Robert the doll is wearing what looks to be like an old sailor suit. And it reminded him so much of Eugene that he decided to get it for him as a birthday present. So, side note here, moving forward, since both Robert the doll and the grandson are both called Robert, I'm just going to refer to the doll as Robert, and I'm going to refer to the son, the little boy, as Eugene, just so there's less confusion. Okay, so moving on. Now, Eugene was extremely excited to get this little doll, and from what most people remembered at the time when he was very young, is that he was said to have had a very unhealthy relationship with this doll, because it's almost like him and Robert were attached at the hip. He would never go anywhere without him. And he would even talk to it like it was a real person, almost like he was having conversations with this doll. So much so that it got to the point that when Eugene would get in trouble or when he was caught doing something that he shouldn't have been doing, he would blame Robert and say Robert did it to anyone. Then one night when Eugene was a little bit older, at the age of 10, he actually woke up in the middle of the night to see Robert sitting at the foot of his bed staring him down. Immediately, he starts screaming like these piercing screams so loud that his mother wakes up and immediately starts running to his room. But on her way to the room, it was reported that she could hear furniture in Eugene's bedroom moving around and almost like it was being pushed aside and tossed around the bedroom. So she gets to the bedroom door, and to her surprise, the bedroom door is jammed. It's locked. All this while Eugene is still screaming his lungs out inside. So she's fumbling with the door, trying to get it to open, and it seemed like forever, but eventually she was able to get the door open. And when she opens the door, she finds Eugene curled up into a little ball on his bed, and Robert was sitting right there at the foot of the bed, still staring at Eugene. All Eugene could say in that moment was that Robert did it. Sadly, though, this horrifying experience was just the beginning of a very, very long life of terrorizing experiences with this doll. At this point, Eugene's parents were very much used to hearing Eugene talking to Robert, but nothing prepared him for the time when they actually heard a voice respond back to Eugene, and it didn't sound like Eugene at all. It didn't sound like another child. It actually sounded like a very, very deep, unnatural voice responding back to Eugene while he was playing upstairs. Apparently, the parents also noticed that Robert the doll had changing facial expressions, and it was reported that they witnessed his face twitching and moving in the slightest of ways. And I'm not sure if this part is true or not, but they actually reported seeing Robert running up the stairs one night. There was even a time where the family had hired a plumber to do some work in the house, and the entire family had left the house to let the plumber do his work. And while this plumber was at the house by himself, he actually reported hearing children giggling upstairs. Now, initially he thought it was probably Eugene, maybe he was at the house, but then he remembered that the entire family had left. And with no other children or even people in the house at that time, the plumber had no idea what to make of it. Eventually, Eugene grew up and he started making a life for himself, and this also involved in him traveling to Europe to study abroad. Now, during this time, Robert stayed back home where Eugene was living with his family in Key West, Florida. Eventually, Eugene went on to meet a girl in Paris, and he went on to get engaged to her. And on May 3rd, 1930, Eugene married Annette Parker in Paris. And from there, the couple actually decided to move back to Key West, Florida to move in with Eugene's parents at their family home. So after moving in, Anne immediately noticed Robert, and she initially didn't quite feel super comfortable around him. She just got a bad vibe about the doll in general. So she decided to move him from their master bedroom and actually place him in a completely different room. But this didn't last very long, because soon enough, Annette started feeling extremely comfortable with Robert in the house. So she decided to ask Eugene if he could possibly put him up in the attic so she wouldn't have to see him. And she would just feel a lot more comfortable in the house if Eugene was just locked up in the attic. So with that, Eugene wanted to make his wife happy and reluctantly agreed to put Robert up in the attic. Unfortunately, it didn't take very long for Robert the doll to start making it known that he was not happy about being banned to the attic. Soon enough, neighbors started coming to the house and telling Eugene that their children were terrified of walking past their house on their way to school or even back from school, because they all had a very similar story, that they could see a doll in the window of one of the bedrooms moving around and even acting in a way that could be perceived as taunting them. So Eugene, after hearing this, is completely shocked, and he was almost adamant that this was just not possible because he knew Robert was locked up in the attic. So after hearing these stories, he goes up to the bedroom that the children were talking about, the one that faced the street with the window. And he was not expecting to find Robert there at all, but to his surprise, he opens the door and there is Robert sitting in a rocking chair right next to the window. Shocked and completely dumbfounded about how Robert could have possibly gotten there, he decides to grab the doll, take him back up to the attic, and lock him up again. But this would prove to be completely useless because Eugene kept finding Robert in the exact same chair right by the window over and over again. And so these little things just kept happening over and over again throughout the years. And unfortunately, in 1974, Eugene ended up dying and Annette died 2 years after him. The home, which is actually quite a famous home in Key West, Florida, was then sold to a woman called Myrtle Reuter with a lot of the family's belongings still in the house, including Robert the doll. She went on to actually own the home for only 6 years, but it wasn't without any incident. Myrtle had a 10-year-old daughter, and over the years, they both claimed and reported that they were completely terrified of Robert the doll. They both said that he gave them an extremely bad vibe, that they just felt really negative energy anytime they were around the doll. And both women claimed that Robert the doll was somehow alive. They couldn't fully explain it, but they just knew that there was something alive about the doll, and they felt like he was somehow trying to hurt them. Specifically, the daughter. She actually woke up multiple times in the middle of the night, screaming her lungs out, because she said that she saw Robert running around in her bedroom. Then in 1980, Myrtle actually sold the home and it became a bed and breakfast, which it still is today. And it's actually called the Art House, and it's a very popular tourist destination in Key West. You can go visit it if you're ever in the area. But for whatever reason, she actually decided to keep Robert the doll with her in her new home. So in 1994, Myrtle decided that she had had enough of Robert. She didn't want to live with him anymore. So she actually decided to donate him to a museum in Key West, Florida called the East Martello Fort Museum, which was a museum that focused on a lot of art and historical features of the region. When she went to donate the doll, she made sure to tell everyone at the museum that she 100% believed that this doll was extremely haunted and that she couldn't explain what it was or why it was haunted, but she made sure to tell everyone to be careful around the doll. Then 3 months later, Myrtle mysteriously died. So the museum, like I said, was based on art and history on the region. So they decided to accept Robert the doll, but they completely disregarded anything Myrtle said about him being haunted. And that was a very bad idea on the museum's part, because it didn't take long for employees of the museum to start reporting very odd things happening, including feeling extremely uncomfortable anytime they were around Robert. Now, some of the first reports actually came from one of the Key West Art and Historical Society assistant director, and his name was Joe Paris. Now, he had actually decided to keep Robert the doll in his office, and he had him sitting on this little antique chair. He said that he would spend some time, while he was in his office, while he was working. He said he would sometimes just spend a few moments staring at Robert, just looking at him, trying to understand him, admiring him. But he said he soon started to feel very uncomfortable doing that, and even having Robert inside the office, because he felt like there was actually something staring back at him. And then this ended up only escalating, because he swore that the chair was starting to move, and he believed that this was Robert making the chair move. So to test out his theory, he actually decided to mark the floor with a pen or a pencil to see whether or not the chair would move on its own. And to his surprise, the chair was found to have moved quite a bit on its own. Now, Joe wasn't the only one using his office. There was actually the museum director, and her name was Susan Olson. And as soon as she saw Robert the Doll, she immediately did not like him and refused to be around him. So much so that it made working impossible for her. So she asked Joe to please put him in one of the artifact storage rooms. And so because he was also freaked out about the doll, he decided, okay, this is probably for the best. And so they decided to put Robert in one of these artifact storage rooms. Now, that's where Robert spent the next 2 years. But word got out that there was a haunted doll at this museum. And so staff at the museum decided to not necessarily put Robert on display, but they decided to start taking appointments for people to come see Robert, one person at a time. But this didn't really help the situation at the museum. A lot of staff felt very, very uncomfortable around the doll. So much so to the point where they would try to cancel appointments, or they would try to pass off appointments to other staff members because they really just didn't want to touch the doll, or they didn't want to even go near it. Now, with people hearing about these stories, the demand to see Robert just kept increasing and increasing. So what the museum did was that they decided to take that responsibility away from the staff, and they actually created a separate display case for Robert in a main part of the museum. Now, with more and more people visiting Robert, the reports and the haunting experiences only increased from there. And this time it started happening to all of the visitors and tourists in the museum. There was one couple who actually had spent their honeymoon in Florida, and towards the end of their honeymoon, they decided to go visit this museum. They go see Robert and, they do their thing. They go check it out. And nothing initially happened while they were there. But when they were on their way home, they actually discovered that their camera had somehow malfunctioned, and they actually ended up losing all of their honeymoon photos, including some of their wedding photos as well. So thinking that this might have had something to do with the haunted doll, they decided to actually return to Key West, Florida on their 1-year anniversary. And this time they decided to come with an offering. They actually brought some little candies and decided to give them as an offering to Robert the doll. And when they voiced this to the doll, the couple actually reported that the lights in the room flickered. So they kind of took this as a sign of Robert acknowledging them and thanking them for their offering, and off they went. Then there's the story of a man called David Sloan, who was actually writing a book on Robert. And while he was trying to write this book, he went through some difficult experiences. He actually ended up losing 4 external hard drives without any explanation. And he actually tried to go get them repaired, and the repair people were able to salvage almost everything that was on his hard drives and on his computers, except the manuscript of the book he was writing. He was also advised by several mediums to put as many of his valuable belongings or personal belongings in a fireproof safe while he was writing his book on Robert, because they felt like there was a negative energy following him. And they also advised him that if Robert didn't like the book that he was writing on him, that there would be some serious consequences. Soon after that, David Sloan started experiencing some very odd things at home, including noises, lights flickering, and one night it escalated to the point where he felt something pull his foot, and then he couldn't explain it, but he said that his entire body levitated off of the bed. And these strange experiences started happening so often to so many of the people coming to visit the museum and Robert that the museum decided to create a list of rules to implement that everyone visiting Robert had to follow in order to minimize the chances of anything negative happening to them. So the rules that people are supposed to follow when they go visit Robert are the following. You must greet and introduce yourself to Robert. Do not Do not tap or knock on the glass case. Do not make fun of Robert or his pet dog. Never question Robert's power or intent. Do not critique Robert's appearance or outfit. Do not critique the letters pinned on the wall. Always ask Robert's permission before taking a photo of him, and thank Robert when you leave. But even with all these rules in place, a lot of people decided to rebel, not follow any of these rules, only to end up suffering. Some examples of people's misfortunes for not following the rules were their camera gear malfunctioning, falling somewhere around the museum, whether they were inside or just exiting the museum, people would fall and get hurt. Some people had car accidents near the museum. People lost their jobs. There was unexplained illnesses, ruined relationships, and even financial difficulties. And with so many people freaking out over all of these hardships that they were experiencing after having visited Robert, they decided to start writing apology letters, which are the letters that are referred to in the rules. There's a mural of apology letters pinned on the wall, and I'll post a picture for you guys so you can see. But people started writing these apology letters, dictating all of the negative things that have happened, and they were even specifying what they were apologizing for in this letter in hopes that this would make all of the negative stuff stop happening. And to this day, it's actually reported that Robert receives between 1 to 3 apology letters every single day. So the question here, I guess, is quite obvious, is what's the deal with Robert? Is he actually haunted? Who's haunting him? Are people making this up? I know some of the stories here are a little bit crazy. Some of them might seem a little bit exaggerated. I'm not entirely sure whether or not Robert running up the stairs on his own is an accurate description of what happened that night in Eugene's house. But I can definitely believe that there are negative energies out there that could be consuming the doll. And that has actually given birth to quite a few theories, and we'll go over a few of them right now. So one of the more popular theories was that Robert the doll was manufactured to be a voodoo doll, but this was quickly debunked because of the manufacturing company where Robert actually came from. He was from a manufacturing company in Germany that was known for making toys, and it was just simply not the case that he was supposed to be a voodoo doll. People think that he was actually supposed to be a store display doll, but because Eugene's grandfather liked the doll so much, he just ended up buying it, and that was that. However, the voodoo theory does have some credence when it comes to this next part. So one of the sub-theories of this voodoo theory is that Eugene's family actually used to have a Haitian maid in the family home, and she was actually reported to have known a lot about voodoo and black magic. And so in this instance, when she saw that Eugene had gotten a new doll, it's believed that she placed a spell on the doll in order to make sure it protected Eugene at all costs. Now, somewhere along the line, it's believed that the spell completely backfired and turned into more of a curse. The second part here is that Eugene's family, again, had a Haitian maid in the house. However, this time it's reported that the family did not treat her well at all, especially Eugene's father. Now, this created a lot of resentment, as you can imagine, a lot of anger, and this maid, knowing black magic and voodoo, decided to place a curse on the doll. The second theory here is that the spirit actually belongs to a young boy. So the story goes that when Eugene's grandfather brought the doll to Eugene, Eugene's mother noticed that the clothing on the doll was not necessarily to her liking, so she decided to go out to town, go to a few different shops, and she actually ended up finding a cute outfit, a nicer sailor outfit that she much better preferred. But what she didn't know is that this new outfit was actually made with material that used to belong to the pajamas of a different young boy that actually ended up dying from yellow fever. Now, a lot of people believe that the spirit of this young boy was attached to that piece of fabric and somehow made his way inside of Robert and is now kind of possessing the doll, and that's where his energy lives. However, a lot of the people that experienced Robert the doll or were around him are adamant that this is not the energy of a young boy, that this definitely feels like something much more sinister, dark, and evil. Now, the third theory here is that it was all Eugene's fault. And if you believe in the world of the universe and parallel realities and manifestation and energies and all that, this might make more sense to you. Now, some people believe that Robert the doll was simply that, just a doll. But as Eugene started to develop this attachment with the doll, he started putting a lot of energy and intent onto the doll. And this included whenever he would blame Robert the doll for all of his misdeeds, right? And some people believe that all of this negative energy that he was putting onto Robert the doll somehow manifested into a form of a negative entity that was living and thriving off of all of the misdeeds that Eugene was blaming on him, and then eventually the fear that it was causing anyone that came into contact with Robert the doll. Those are the three main theories that I was able to come across. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Is this something that you guys think is just completely made up? Do you think people are just exaggerating the truth? Do you think people are just making this story live on for the sake of it? Or do you think that Robert could actually be possessed by something? Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you've heard of any other theories or explanations as to what could be causing all of these misfortunes, I would be super interested to know. Alright, so that's it for today's video, guys. If you enjoyed this, please leave a comment, like, or subscribe. And if you have any other video suggestions, of course, you're welcome to leave them in the comments below. I will see you guys in the next video.